Let me explain exactly how I render beef tallow. I'm explaining everything, going over all the tips and tricks and ways that I have made it the most efficient that I can over years and years of doing this and rendering a couple thousand pounds every month. This is a lot, so it'll be a bit of a longer video, so save this to come back to, be prepared to take notes, grab screenshots, whatever. And let me just say, this is my way of doing things based on my experience. If you have a different way of doing things, fantastic. Share that with us. Just don't be a butthead to people who do things differently than you. And feel free to modify this as needed based on what you have access to. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. Tallow is the rendered fat from any ruminant. There are two types, suet and trimmings. Suet is the fat from around the kidneys, and trimmings are the fat scraps from all the other areas. They have a different fatty acid composition. Both are great. Both have their own uses. Suet is considered more ideal for skincare because it's less greasy feeling, it has less scent, and a better fatty acid composition relative to the skin. However, trimmings are not necessarily bad for the skin, just not ideal for some people. But if that's all you have access to, you use it. It's still good stuff. You can cook with either one of them. You can make candles and soap and all kinds of other stuff with both of them. I've got a ton of videos on all of that stuff, but let's focus on just rendering for now. Whatever you're using, you can usually ask your local meat processors and butchers for it. I get mine from local meat processors that process for local farms. You'll trim off any meat bits, if they're present, and chop it up into small pieces. The smaller, the better. It'll render faster and with less waste. This can be easier if it's partially frozen, especially if you're working with trimmings, because they're pretty pliable and a little bit more difficult to cut. I work with just suet now, and my amazing meat processor grinds that suet for me, so this is what mine looks like. Now, all that fat goes into a brew bag in an electric roaster. You can use whatever device you like. Some people use crockpots, stovetop, whatever. I like the electric roasters because they're easier to control the temperature really precisely, and I don't have to babysit the tallow as much through rendering and worry about it getting too hot and burning anything, that sort of stuff. Anyway, I dump the suet into the bag in the roaster and add salt and water on top. I do about 1/4 cup of salt and 1 quart of water for every 10 pounds of fat, and I cover it with a lid. The water and salt don't need to be exact measurements, it's just a rough ballpark. The salt is meant to weaken the protein structures of the extraneous tissues, and then the salt and all those impurities can settle out to the bottom away from your tallow. Now, this is where we need to draw the distinction between dry and wet rendering. What I'm doing is wet rendering. Some people prefer dry rendering, meaning they add no water or salt. That's perfectly fine. I prefer this method based on my experience. I just feel like I get a little bit of a better end product. But again, it's just personal preference. All right, we're going to turn our roaster on and heat this tallow to 160 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit and let that sit until it's fully rendered out, meaning the liquid is separating from the extraneous tissues. It has to reach that 160 degree mark for biological safety. We don't want a cesspool of bacteria because this is a raw animal product, so we need to treat it as such. Now, this is where all that chopping into tiny pieces or grinding the fat makes a really big difference. The smaller the pieces, the faster this will go. I can render down about 30 pounds of fat in 4 to 5 hours with around a 90% yield with it being ground suet. If it's larger pieces of suet, I may get an 80-85% yield in 5 to 7 hours. If it's trimmings, I may get a 70% yield with tiny pieces and a 40% yield with large chunks. The point is to get as much surface area of the actual fatty tissue exposed outside of the connective tissue that encases it, so that the fat can liquefy and render out before the connective tissues effectively cook and kind of lock it inside. All right, moving on. Once that's fully rendered, I'm going to pull my bag of solids, and this is why I use these bags, because now I can just pull all those solid bits out and the tallow is left behind. It makes for a much easier and faster filtering and a lot less mess. I'm still going to do another filter, but this is just kind of the first part of that. Now, these bags I'm using are 100% unbleached cotton, and yes, you can just dispose of them if you want, but you can also absolutely reuse them. Dump out the solids, boil off the soaked in tallow, and soak and scrub them. I use a lot of hot water, dish soap, and washing soda with a washboard when I'm reusing them, but it definitely is a chore, so keep that in mind. Now, once that bag is pulled out, I'll let that sit and cool for a few minutes just to give all that water and sediment time to settle back to the bottom of the pan. This will make it easier to pour off. Now, here's my filtering setup. I've got a full-size deep hotel pan to pour this tallow into, and the filter I'm using is a honey strainer, which has 2 layers, and in between those layers, I'm putting a 25 micron stainless steel mesh sheet. This means I have a filter on the top that'll catch any larger particles, and that stainless steel mesh will catch any of the tiny particles. This is how we get a super clean tallow from the get-go. So I scoop just the top portion in until it's low enough that I can more easily just pick up the pan to pour it in, and I'm just pouring off the tallow on top. That water and sediment is at the bottom, so as soon as it's poured to the point that it is hard to keep the water from coming out with the tallow, I'll set it aside and pour that bottom section into a separate pan. I'm usually working with 4 roasters at a time here, so that'll give me 3 to 4 pans of really clean tallow with little to no water in the bottom, and then 1 pan with the water from all 4 of those roasters, plus a smaller bit of tallow on top. Now, these cleaner pans of tallow with no water will likely only need 2 more renders to get fully ready and shelf stable, while the one with all the water may need, like 1 extra render because, it just has a lot more water in it, and it's just going to take a little longer to be fully ready. This just makes it more efficient for me. But again, I'm working through hundreds of pounds of tallow at a time, so alter this however suits you. So onward we go. These pans of tallow will cool in the fridge and set solid, and then we'll pop them out, scrape anything off the bottom that may have somehow made its way through the filtering process, and then cut it up and put it back into a clean roaster. Now, a quick side note, if you're working with trimmings, you may end up with your water being more gelatin, and that's pretty normal. Suet doesn't have much collagen in the extraneous tissue, so you usually don't get much gelatin with suet. It's not impossible, just usually not much, if any, but trimmings have a lot of collagen in those extra tissues, depending on where on the cow it's from. So once that collagen cooks and mixes with water, that's what gelatin is. I'll save it and freeze it to use in broths and soups and sauces and things like that. Just remember, it also has all of that saltage poured in it. So if you use that, so taste it before seasoning if you're going to cook with it. All right, back to the tallow. We'll chop up our cleaned up tallow, dry off any water that's on it, and then place it into a clean roaster. We'll melt it down, and then once it's fully melted, I will bring that temperature up to 212 to 225 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 to 60 minutes. What this does is it gets it just to the boiling point of water so that it can rise to the top and evaporate out. We cannot have water in our tallow or it will not be shelf stable. It will grow mold and bacteria if you leave even a drop of water in it. Just because most of the water separates to the bottom of the pan when the tallow cools does not mean that water is not trapped within the tallow itself. And even if you dry render from the get-go and you've never added water to the tallow, if you put a lid on it during rendering or as it cools, whatever, condensation will form and it will likely introduce water. So bringing it to this temperature is still really important. No, it does not hurt the fatty acids. Fatty acids don't begin to break down until you reach close to their smoke point, which for tallow is over 400 degrees Fahrenheit, so you're good. Okay, once that tallow has sat at that temperature for 30 to 60 minutes, I'm going to filter it again through that same kind of setup as I showed before. You can see even having gone through multiple filters and a 25 micron mesh, which is tiny, there are still impurities that solidify and form once it's melted again. This is exactly why I will never agree that one and done rendering and filtering is safe and effective. But that's just me. All right, so filter this, let it cool in the fridge again, and set solid. Once that's cool, we just repeat that same process. Pop it out of the pan, scrape anything on the bottom, even though there really shouldn't be anything at this point. Chop it up, put it back in a clean roaster, melt it down, bring your temperature back up to 212 to 225 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 to 60 minutes. Now, when you're chopping up your tallow at this time, you may notice that it has a mild buttery scent instead of that stronger scent that you may have noticed the first round. That's normal. You're not going to get it scentless, at least if you have any decently strong sense of smell. You're going to smell something on it. We're not deodorizing it. We're rendering a natural product. So it's going to have a natural smell like butter and milk do. It's totally normal. So this is our third render. And yes, I know you can only technically render tallow once, as rendering is the act of separating the lipids from the tissues, but the colloquial term for remelting in this process is still rendering, so I'm going to say it like that. So anywho, this is a third render, and at this point, if your tallow is sitting at that 212 to 225 degree mark for 30 to 60 minutes, and there are no bubbles, no streaks of impurities on top of the tallow, no sediment on the bottom, no movement and bubbling coming up from the bottom, no other signs of water, then it is done. Filter it one more time through that same setup, and it's ready to put into clean jars or buckets or whatever you want to use, stored in a cool, dry place. It'll have a shelf life of 12 to 18 months roughly, and you can refrigerate or freeze it to use later if you want, and it'll be good probably for years. You can cook with it, use it for skincare, make soap, candles, wooden leather conditioners, fire starters, whatever. It has a ton of uses. So there you go. That is exactly how I render all of the tallow that I use myself and that I sell. While I think I covered most of the process, let me know if you have any questions.